Fantastic. Okay, well then we will start. So we will be recording today's session and it will be available to save you taking too many notes. The slides will also be available afterwards. So I'm going to go through the government guidance around the roadmap to easing restrictions. Ray's going to do a little presentation for us, just talking about how we can celebrate the good things that have happened and the good work that you are doing as groups. And then we've got a bit of an update on our funding fair from Joe, and also our funding update, the top 5 funders. So I will share my screen. Ray, if you can just let me know when that's available. Thank you. So there are quite a few slides to go through. I've put them together as a slide pack so that you can go back and you can reference them again. We'll also be attaching a summary of the government guidance so that you can have a look at those rules in sort of smaller amounts of detail. But the link at the bottom here is to the full government guidance, which is about 51 pages. So if you wanted to go through the actual full guidance, you can. Legislation is always a little bit behind, and I imagine that any legislative changes will come through in that week between each of the steps that we'll be talking about later. So there isn't any legislative changes yet. So there is just the guidance. So that is obviously slightly open to interpretation, and it can change, as can the interpretation of that guidance. And we will be talking about quite a significant one in a few moments. So a little reminder to start off with that as of today, we are still under all the lockdown restrictions. The guidance is still to stay at home as much as you can and to not go to work unless you have to, and to work from home. In order to protect our NHS, to keep those numbers that are being admitted to hospital as low as possible, and to ultimately save lives. So just a reminder that even though we're talking about the easing of restrictions, where we are right now is still under the lockdown rules and guidance. I thought it might be useful just to see a little snapshot of where Dorset is at the moment. And we can see quite a massive drop really on all of those scales around admissions to hospital, deaths and infection rates. But it is probably worth highlighting, I'm just going to annotate my pointer. It is worth highlighting that if we look along here at our infection rates, we can still see that although they've come down considerably, they're still running higher than the average for the Southwest. And for BCP, they're only running just slightly under the average across the whole of the UK. And when you consider what a rural area we are, that means that our rates have been quite high, because the rural areas have been running considerably under the England average. So it's just worth noting that really, that although things are looking really, really good and we're seeing those rates coming down, kind of really starting to come down quite quickly now, which is good, where it was a little bit sluggish before. It's still worth remembering that we're still running at rates that are significantly higher than we probably would want them to be. A lovely thing that we can celebrate, though, is that we've reached the 250,000 mark on vaccinations in Dorset, which I think is outstanding. Full credit to our NHS staff, to our local PCNs, and of course also to the myriad of voluntary services that have been involved, from marshalling right the way through to transport and getting people to their vaccinations. So, I think a tremendous well done. But as I say, remembering that our rates are probably still a bit higher than we would like, which is why we're still looking at the kind of guidance that we were looking at when we talked back in February. So these are still the common rules as they stand at the moment. This was from the that seemed to have picked up a frog. This slide is from the full government guidance on the roadmap to easing restrictions, talking about mental health and particularly depression and anxiety at this time. And I think it is worth reminding ourselves that even though the weather has got better, we can see a light at the end of the tunnel through vaccinations, and we can see the easing of restrictions starting to happen. We're still running at quite high rates of depression and anxiety amongst the population. So this is also a time really to remind people to take care of each other and to take care of ourselves, to look out for signs of people that may be suffering more or are struggling with the isolation, And also for those who are shielding, where we're starting to look at shielding restrictions being lifted at the end of March, it's just a reminder really that for a large part of the community, they have been tucked away for a very long time. And they're not necessarily just going to be able to leap with joy back into society, but actually they're going to need some help from communities to reintegrate back into life, to doing all the usual things that they were doing before COVID hit. So I think it's just that reminder really that although we're talking about a lot of positives and a lot of movement forward, that actually we still need to be taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other. So the government roadmap. Now, this is obviously the current guidance as best as we have it from the 3rd of March. So it's worth just remembering that things do change. So the changes that may happen to the roadmap will be based around these 4 tests. That's that the vaccination program continues to go to plan so that there aren't any hiccups with the supply of the vaccination or with take up, or we don't have pockets of the population in significant areas that are not taking up the vaccine, which means that we have areas where we could have heightened risk. That evidence shows that vaccines are significantly reducing the number of people dying or needing hospital. And that's so far evidence that's a big tick. We're definitely seeing that the vaccinations are having an impact, not just on the transmission, but also on the severity where people have had COVID after a first injection. What we're seeing is that they're unlikely to be admitted to hospital. So we're seeing that the vaccines are having that sort of level of impact. The infection rates don't surge. And so as each step is taken, that's one of the main things that will be looked at. We would expect to see some increase. Our numbers are still, as we said, probably higher than we would like them to be. So as we move out of lockdown, we're going to see those numbers come up. That's a natural thing to see. It's just we don't want them to surge, which could lead to a risk for hospital admissions, and that we're not seeing any new variants of the virus which could fundamentally change the lifting of any restrictions. So those are the 4 tests as laid out by the government that they will be monitoring in between each stage. So when we talk about the stages or steps, they've been given guideline dates. These are not before dates. So step 2 won't be reached before the 12th of April, whatever happens, but it could be later than. And so that's really important that we bear in mind with any planning that we do that these are the earliest dates that these things could happen. And we don't see them as in any way laid in stone because they're not, they're guidance. And those 4 tests could affect whether or not we meet these dates for each step. There will be a 5-week gap between each step. The idea behind that is 4 weeks to collect data. And then if everything's looking good, there'll be 1 week's notice to say that opening will be happening in line with the next step, or it'll be 1 week's notice that that won't be happening and that there will be a delay to that step starting. So that's what we should be looking at. We should be looking at significant notice, and probably yourselves, you'll be seeing through what's coming out on the media whether we're going to be hitting that next step. So if you're seeing on the news that there's been a massive surge in infection rates, then it may be saying that we're not going to hit that next step date. So you will be getting some indicators, I'm sure, yourself. We've got quite a significant update around community buildings. So the date that many of us have been working to is the 12th of April as the reopening of community buildings. When the further guidance came out on the 25th of February, there was some concern that it seemed to contradict the guidance that had been given on the 22nd. So ACRE, who works across the whole of rurality nationally, was able to liaise with the government through DEFRA to get some further guidance. And it would seem that there was a contradiction. So social distancing rules and everything else that are in place still around the 12th of April would mean that although you can open your community building for all the things you currently can, such as support groups and education, you will not be able to open for social activities. So arts, knit and natter, social groups, those things won't be able to open. So the earliest that we can really see opening for those kind of activities is the 17th of May. So it's really important, I suppose this is what I was saying before, about keeping an eye on the guidance, because that's all it is at the moment, and a lot of it will still need interpretation. So I'll be going through this in more detail as we go through the steps, but I thought it was worth highlighting in a slide on its own, because I know for many of you may have been working to the 12th of April as an open date, but actually it's only for a very small number of extra activities to the ones you currently can, and it doesn't include any social activities. But we'll begin now to go through the steps. So probably the one that most of us are familiar with is the 8th of March. So we've heard quite a lot about that. The schools are reopening and all children are going back to school. For any village halls that support schools with their school activities, you will also be able to do those. It's part of the education banner that you've been able to work under, or community buildings have been able to work under as part of this lockdown. So outdoor after school activities and wraparound childcare will also restart. So again, that may include your community building, or it may be a service that you currently provide. So you will be able to restart those in line with the particular guidance which you will find through the .gov website for those particular industries, so childcare, wraparound services, after schools activities. There is separate guidance for that, and I haven't done it here actually, but I will hyperlink that to take you to that separate guidance around out of school activities, so that you've got that as a hyperlink. Also, something I know that I'm looking forward to is that two people will be able to meet recreationally outdoors. So it doesn't necessarily mean just for exercise. Now, before you think that's some diss on my part for exercise, I'm all in favour of walking with a friend, but it's so hard to walk and drink coffee. So I am looking forward to that bench sit where I can sit within socially distant space from a best friend and have a coffee and a natter. So that's a nice thing that we can all look forward to. As we move through March into March 29th, this is still step one. We will then begin to see outdoor gatherings. So we have the rule of six comes back. Now, to remind people the rule of six, that means that two households can get together. They can go over the number of six, those two households, but they can only be from two households. A household can include a support bubble. If you're not two households and you are a group getting together from different households, you can't exceed the number of six. So there can only be six of you. So you and five other people. So just to say that again, two households can get together. The two households can go over the number of six. And they can include one of the households, or the other household can include somebody who's part of a support bubble as part of that household numbers. If you are not two households, if you are more than two households getting together, so a group of friends getting together, only six can get together. So that's you and five other people. And that's really significant because we know that the rule of six will apply to some of the opening up of some activities as we go through. Outdoor sports facilities will be open. Outdoor organised adult and children's sports will also be open. So things like grassroots football. Outdoor organised activities for children can take place outdoors. So brownies, for example, can meet up as part of outdoor adventures, but they can't meet up indoors. Outdoor parent and children groups can meet with up to 15 attending plus under fives. And as we said before, out of school settings will be able to accept all children. So we move on to step two. So this is from the earliest, the 12th of April. So community buildings, be aware, there are still limits. Social activity is still not permitted, but the activities that are listed here can have an impact on community buildings. So for example, funerals can take place up to 30 people. Wakes and weddings will be allowed up to 15 guests. Now, what we're aware of is, of course, that restaurants and most of hospitality is closed still at this stage. So that is a facility, a service that could be offered by community buildings. They could offer support for wakes and wedding receptions. Again, they'd have to fulfill all the other guidance that we've talked about. So they'd have to make sure that households weren't mingling. They'd have to make sure that the hire agreement clearly details what they can and can't do. There would have to be rigorous COVID secure measures put in place. But that is an activity that is permitted. All children's indoor activities can restart. So it's really important to see the difference between adult and children activities. So when we say dance classes, we really do mean for children. Now, no specific age has been attached to that in the guidance that I can see at the moment. So as a rule of thumb, we would normally say under 16. If I see a change to that, we'll make sure that we promote that so that people have got an awareness of age, because it could include under 18s. So I would say that at the moment, if you're working with a group that does any of those indoor activities and they're working with 17 to 18-year-olds, that might be something that you'll need to check further through the guidance. At the moment, I didn't see an age in the guidance. Parents and children groups can reopen non-essential retail, so that also includes charity shops. And outdoor gatherings or events that are organised, so by businesses or charities, can be held under COVID secure conditions. So that does imply that fates and things like that will be able to start after the 12th of April. But there is further guidance that will be issued on this. So I think I would probably say that it would be premature to go for some kind of fate around about the 12th of April, probably through to the end of April, because you could end up with the guidance coming out quite close to that date that actually says that there's a lot of restrictions in place. But we can begin preparing maybe for the idea of some events as we move perhaps very much the end of April into May. That could be something you might want to consider planning. It could even be part of a reopen strategy, but it will be subject to the rule of six. You won't be able to have different households mingling, so you will have to have quite strict entrance, exits to the fete. You'll have to be very careful about people touching things and cleaning. So I would wait for the specific guidance to come out on that one. Oh, I'm sorry, that jumped forward. Worth mentioning within step 2, as I've said before, the social contact rules will continue to apply in all settings. So you will still need social distancing, so 2 metres or 1 metre with risk mitigation, for example, masks, screens, and no indoor mixing allowed between different households. So even though we've got that sort of slow reopening, those rules still apply. And I've got the guidance here from the 25th of February on reopening businesses and venues, which again, you can click on that link to open if you'd like to read it in more detail. And it does talk about the fact that apart from where there is explicit exemption, and that's support groups, supervised activities for children, parent and children groups, communal worships, wedding reception, or commemorative event like a wake, apart from those, then the same lockdown rules applied as applied before. And then we move into step 3 on the 17th of May at the earliest, and we can start looking at controlled indoor events. So this is where you can have a 50% capacity. And many of you will remember that was part of how the lockdown restrictions were lifted before. So you can begin planning really for around about the 17th of May. I would say be very cautious with your bookings. Make sure that all of your bookings have got cancellation built into them if the rules change, that you have a plan in place for if you have to delay an activity and do it at a later date. So there's no reason why you can't begin planning, but those plans need to be very cautious, and you need to make sure that you've got inbuilt into that sort of escape angles for if delays do come. We're starting to see hospitality settings will be open in accordance with the rule of six. So community cafes, social clubs can take place. Film shows, plays, concerts, sports matches can all take place with social distancing. And indoor sporting activities can also take place. So that includes exercise classes. So exercise classes, which is one of the higher risk activities, if you remember from last time, when we start to open up to say exercise classes are permissible, we're really starting to say that indoor activity is all permissible. We're raising the amount of people that can attend wedding receptions and funerals, and christening and bar mitzvahs will also be allowed at this time. And organised outdoor entertainment can also take place. There will still be some limits. I know they've given the 50% capacity rule, but I think we will be seeing limitations on the number of people that can gather for outdoor activities, and we'll probably see some further guidance on that when they release it. I'm hoping along with the 12th of April guidance around things like village fates and things like that. But we will see a review of the rule of six we will see a review of the rule of six for outdoor gatherings, and that may be replaced by a maximum of 30. So outdoor gatherings and outdoor events are two things that have not been clarified in the guidance. So outdoor gatherings was a phrase that was used for people getting together in a group, say at the park or in a garden. And events were much more structured and were organised by a business. They've not really differentiated between those, but I think that's because further guidance is going to come out before the 12th of April on that. And step 4, the 21st of June, this is where really all legal limits are hoping to be removed, when we will actually see the end of the lockdown restrictions. I think it would be realistic to say, particularly as the guidance states it, that COVID secure measures will still need to be in place. We won't be throwing away the masks and the shields in our buildings or the limits on numbers. But what we will be seeing is that opening up of the end of lockdown. And as I say, the earliest for that is the 21st of June, and obviously all of those dates can change. So when looking at reopening, and that may just be a full reopening, or it may be a partial reopening, so you're restarting part of your business, or there's been a reduction in the way you've been able to do your service because you've had staff who are furloughed or volunteers who have not been coming in to do the business. So whatever form of reopening that may take, is be cautious, do plan, but also make sure that you've got delay built in. There's quite a bit of guidance from previous webinars that we've done that is still relevant and is still useful, and I've put some links in here. So risk assessments, for example, we covered quite extensively when we talked about reopening previously. Those templates are still worth looking at, and they're still useful. For any of you that have already done many risk assessments, and I expect there's quite a few of you that might even be a little bit sick of risk assessments, but you do have to revisit them. Please don't be complacent. If you were open back in the summer and haven't been open since, you need to go back and you need to relook at that risk assessment. Is it still valid? Is it still live? And if you audit it and check it, make sure you redate it so that you can see that it's been done recently. So even if you did your risk assessment, say just before the November lockdown, it really still needs to be reviewed to make sure that everything in it is still valid. And remember that your risk assessment can be really good evidence for making applications for funding for PPE and extra COVID secure measures that you might need to do. You can make a direct reference to it in any funding bid saying, as a result of our risk assessment, we have highlighted a greater need for PPE for X number of our volunteers. So it's a perfect evidence tool to say that you need it. And no funder is going to come back and question the validity of your risk assessment, because risk assessment is very personalised to each organisation. So that's definitely, that's a good reason to do it, and hopefully it's a good reason that you'll be able to apply it as well. Do make sure you check all of your health and safety requirements. So your insurance, make sure that that's all in place, and make sure that there aren't any further restrictions the insurance will have put on your building or on the service that you provide. Your fire safety risk assessment, please do make sure that's up to date. And do also make sure, if you've done any work at all, if you have a building and you've done any work on that building during lockdown, that is included in your fire risk assessment, and also your other risk assessments too. So if you've added on toilets or you've had any work done to the mainstay of your building, please make sure that's covered. And the same goes really for any changes that you've done to the purpose of the charity that you're running, that if you're offering a slightly different service to the way that you were working it before, that's also built into your risk assessments. And if you've got staff returning So from having perhaps been working remotely or home working and they're coming back to an office environment or they're coming back to direct delivery, please make sure that you've risk assessed specifically around staff and taken into consideration those concerns that staff might have about coming back. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment. A reminder that Test, Trace and Isolate will still be up and running and will be for the foreseeable future. I think it's quite possible this will take us right the way through till next year. We will need to be on top of what may happen come winter. And that's one of the ways that we'll be able to see whether there are changes in infection rate or whether there are concerns around new variants. So I don't think it's going to be gone for a while. So you will need to still keep attendance, booking details, so that track and trace can work if there should be an outbreak in your working environment. Hand washing, masks and social distancing will still apply, and there will be to some form or another, probably right the way through until later than that June date. There will be some element of continuing to keep ourselves as COVID secure as possible. I think there are some things like the hand wash being available to members of the public, better hand washing facilities than we've had before. I think those are things that are probably going to be around forever after COVID, particularly when we look at the reduction in flu incidents that we've had this year and the fact that we haven't had a death registered for flu this year. It shows the impact that the lockdown measures, which we don't want to see repeated, but also the improvement in hand washing, mask wearing and social distancing has had. So some of that may well be around for other winters to come. Do check capacity limits. Make sure you're on top of that. They are likely to fluctuate. They are exactly the kind of numbers that can change. So if you're planning on 30 being the number that you're allowed to do, keep your eye on it to make sure that that doesn't change. There will be updates. Make sure you're signed up for our e-news. Make sure that you're getting the updates from us. And there are also other good resources which we always share from other organisations that are providing updates, particularly ACRE. And there will be the latest ACRE guidance will be attached as part of the resources from today's session. I put the link there for DCA's website, which is definitely worth visiting, but I would say that, wouldn't I? But Ray's done a fantastic job on our COVID-19 page, and that's where that link takes you directly to with all of the resources throughout the pandemic. Some of them may be older and you'd need to check that they're the most up to date, but where there have been actual updates made, we've always replaced the document with the latest document. If you look very carefully where it says reopening guidance, you'll see that they're two separate hyperlinks, but I appreciate you might not be able to see there is a gap between the two Gs. The reopening will take you to the reopening of village halls 1st of July, and the guidance will take you to the reopening of village halls on the 29th of July. There's quite a lot of resources there, not just for village halls and for community buildings, but actually for all organisations reopening. And you'll find a lot of risk assessment, health and safety guidance there, and it's definitely worth visiting. Our webinars, it's worth going back and looking at them. And of course, there's a fantastic guide that was produced by ACRE about reopening back in August of 2020. And their reopening checklist on Appendix A is fantastic. And I would definitely recommend it for any building-based organisation to go through, because it really does go starting with checking your insurance right the way through to all the other checks that you might want to make before you open your doors to the public. So I don't want to preempt the budget, but seeing as most of it's been leaked, I thought it would be silly not to mention some of it. So of course, the detail for all of this will be announced by Sunak. I don't think I've got a time actually, but later on this late afternoon into evening when they do the budget announcement. But quite a bit has already been announced, and I thought it was worth really just doing a little summary of that. There is money being made available to community groups to take over pubs and sports clubs at risk of closure. Be about £250,000, which will be match funded. So there will be quite a bit of money that needs to be raised by communities to support those buildings. But the match funding offer is obviously very welcome. And for some of our villages, it will make a massive difference. I'm not going to go through this in lots of detail, really, just that there is money being made available. There's quite a bit being made available for the arts, which is being added to the money that was already put aside for the Culture Recovery Fund. And I need to make an apology, actually. The figure there isn't correct. That was a holding figure, so I apologise for that. The Culture Recovery Fund is considerably more than that. I think it's about 1.8 billion, I think, but I will check that, and that will be changed in the slides that you receive. My apologies, I forgot to change it. So that 3 million is money that's being added to that fund that is already available. This is new money for museums and cultural bodies, and also for community cultural projects. Now, we don't know the detail yet for those, and I'm hoping this afternoon we'll get some greater detail on how that money will be allocated and how groups will be able to apply for that money. There's 5 billion being put aside for a business restart scheme, which is obviously helping retail businesses, hospitality, personal care. So businesses that have been very heavily affected by COVID-19. As yet, there was no news about charitable businesses. So that's something we'll be obviously keeping our eye out for, and making sure that if those grants are available for charitable businesses, that we'll make sure that you know about it through our e-news. Furlough will be extended until the end of September. You'll probably be looking at an employer contribution of about 10% in July, rising to about 20% August, September, as we begin to phase out of the furlough. But that should be announced today. And the £20 uplift for universal credits to be extended for 6 months. That is, I think, almost solely down to the charities that have lobbied the government very heavily that it was too early to take away that uplift. So I think, phenomenal work by the charities involved really in getting that decision made, and will make a big difference. And the business rates holiday to be extended. So support for your team, as I mentioned, if you're looking at bringing your staff back from furlough, or you're bringing volunteers back who've not been working for you, it is really important that you do it as safely as possible. And there are some phenomenal resources out there. Do ask the question, is it essential? Is it safe? And have we mutually agreed? Just because you're able to doesn't mean that you should or that you have to. For many businesses, I think some element of blended working from home and coming into work is going to be the future. So you don't have to bring staff back just because there's easing of lockdown. So do make sure that you've gone through that checklist. And these are really great resources that are shared here. Just to give a little bit of background to some of the acronyms which are floating all about this page. The CIPD is the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development. IOSH is the Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and SOM is the Society of Occupational Medicine. So these are really good organisations that are behind putting these kits together. I particularly like the guide around supporting people returning after having had COVID or have got long COVID, because obviously this is something to consider as well when we're looking at staff returning. So these are the slides that we've used previously about support that is available through Dorset Council. So if you are aware of anybody who's shielding, there is support still available. The hope is that shielding will end at the end of March. That's the hope. And as long as everything continues going as well as it is, then that should be the case. There is still an isolation payment that is available, and there is help available for anybody that is suffering financial difficulties or feeling overly stressed, worried, anxious, depressed. The hospitality grants that were made available will be closing at the end of March. So if you think you should have received a payment, if you think you would be eligible for rates, if you weren't getting some kind of discount from somebody, then please make sure that you've applied and you can register here. This is kind of the last crack of the whip on that one. We may see some money filter down further, but I think, to be honest with you, it's probably the last of the lockdown grants. If you received one in November, you should have received one now. And if you haven't received one, then again, please do check. And there's just a mention there about the job retention scheme. These are the numbers that we always put up around getting support. And remember, it's not just our communities that need support, it can be us as well. If you're feeling the pressure, if you're finding it difficult to cope, there is help that is available. And if you go back to our previous webinar on the 3rd of February. We had quite a considerable number of support telephone numbers on there. We also did one on mental well-being, which could be worth revisiting. Do take care of yourself. It is really important. We can't keep giving compassion to our community if we've lost all compassion for ourselves. So 51 pages of guidance condensed into a few slides is always difficult. So hopefully I've caught the major salient points from that. The guidance sheet from ACRE is excellent, and I've used that as a summary sheet really for a lot of the guidance on the slides, and that will be made available to you. Thank you for bearing with us because we started just a little bit later than normal. So hopefully we're still going okay time-wise. I'm just going to hand over to Ray now, who's just going to say a few words about sharing the positives. Thank you, Ray.
So, hello, everybody. I just wanted to highlight our good news stories, and it's a bit of a shout out really, just to share your messages with us and share those good news stories so that we can basically help promote what you're doing and share a bit of positivity as well. So if you've got any lovely stories, then you can get in touch. I'll put our email in the chat so you can get in touch. But these are some of the stories that we have done in the past. So we've had some lovely updates from Line Forward Food Bank and My Time Young Carers, the Litchip Matravers Angels, and also the UK Nepal Friendship Society. There's just a few, but it's really lovely to read and see, and hopefully it just brightens up our newsletters with your story. So it's not just all about us, it's about you. And it's also Paula highlighted yesterday that actually the information that we share, because we take your words and then sort of promote it in this kind of way, you can use it for your funding bids and that kind of thing. So it just helps just share messages and share what's awesome and going on in the community. So I know that everybody's very, very busy doing all the things that they're doing. Obviously, a lot of this stuff is very hard work to get up and running and reopen. But don't forget about your successes and share that with everybody, and then it will bring more people to your cause and just share a bit of love, really. So yes, that's it. I'll pop the email in the chat, like I said, but just get in touch, and then hopefully we can all help each other out. So yeah, spread the word, share the love.
Lovely. Thank you, Ray. And it is really important. I know myself, I go through, well, you can imagine, I go through a lot of documents a week that I have to read. And I personally look forward to looking at our e-news. And in there can be quite a lot of information to take on board. So honestly, coming across your stories at the end of the e-news and being able to actually celebrate the difference that's being made in Dorset actually makes a difference to my mental well-being. So thank you, Ray, for doing that. And thank you to the groups that have shared with us. And please do be forthcoming. It's a form of promotion. Blow your whistle, trumpet. Blow. No, I'm not going to say blow something. That would be inappropriate. Joe, can I come to you? Dig me out of this hole. So we're going to talk about the funding fair and then a little bit of a funding update. Thank you, Joe. Joe, you're on mute.
Okay, can you all hear me loud and clear? Right, so top 5 funding updates. I'll do this one first. National Lottery is growing Great Ideas programme. They've got a new 25 million revenue and capital grant programme offering grants starting at £150,000 over multiple years. So this is one of those programs that you can have a funding for sort of quite a few years rather than sort of the 6 months here and the 9 months there that most people are used to. So this could make an absolutely massive difference to the ideas that you have and the projects that you run. Postcode Local Trust is a derivative of the Postcode Lottery, but they focus on sort of the regional areas. So be quite careful. I mean, we've put the link here, but if you ever look for it on the main Google thing, it's quite difficult to actually find the one for West England. It often takes you to the Scottish one for some reason. But this is funding for smaller charities up to £20,000, and they're focusing on the west of England with this particular one, and it's under the sort of main themes of mental well-being, sort of poverty, all the usual sort of things that you would expect to find. There's a sort of fair amount of choice. Now, I don't know how many of you go fishing, so I have to say I'm not, I wouldn't even attempt to try and do fishing myself, but for those that would be interested in taking up fishing, there's actually a £100,000 grant fund offering grants of £500 to £5,000 for charities, schools, local authorities, and any angling clubs and fisheries in England, which would encourage more people to start up and continue fishing. So if you happen to know any angling clubs, I know there's a couple down in Weymouth, and this could be something that could be interesting for you. And the Pixel Fund, this is for mental health and well-being of children and young adults under the age of 25. These grants are between £500 and £5,000, and you've got to be a UK-based registered charity, or you can be a CIO as well. And then Matthew Good. Matthew Good is, I don't actually know who Matthew Good is, but the foundation is fantastic. They like to do grants for good, grants of up to £3,500 for small UK charities, community and voluntary groups, and social enterprises, which is quite unusual to see something for social enterprise as well. But you must have an annual turnover of under £50,000. And they want that money to have a positive impact on communities, people, and the environment. So I think those 5 are really interesting and very varied amounts that you can go for as well. Okay, so that's the top funding updates. Now we're going to go on to our particularly beautifully coloured slide that shows you all the different people that are going to be involved with with the funding fair next week. The funding fair next week. The funding fair. Yay! Ah, dear. So this is the funding fair. These are the different organisations that are going to be involved in the funding fair next week. And as you can see, there's a fair few of them. Probably a lot of them are very familiar to you. Dorset Community Foundation is a good local organisation. Ellie Maguire will be providing an introduction to the foundation and its grant making. And she'll also be talking about some top tips for writing funding applications, because she has found over time that there are many stumbling blocks that are common to lots of different organisations that apply to their funds. So definitely worth going to see what she has to say. John Bird from Dorset Council is going to be talking about funding that fits, and he's going to be talking about the fact that it's really difficult finding the right funding, and you need to take the time to consider a few key questions that can make the search for your funding better. So it's smart working, basically. So you're finding funding that fits, simpler, easier, and more likely to result in a successful application, rather than filling in sort of 100 applications. You might be filling in 10 instead. Also going to have somebody from Low Carbon Dorset. This is a very popular thing at the moment, particularly if you've got a community building. Low Carbon Dorset is the Dorset Council-led programme, which provides free advice and grant funding to Dorset's businesses, community organisations, and it helps to improve your energy efficiency and develop renewable energy projects as well. So if you're thinking about solar panels, heat source pumps, that type of thing for any buildings that you may have, definitely worth going along to listen to Low Carbon Dorset. You also see Quiz-a-lot. Quiz-a-lot is the logo just underneath Dorset Community Foundation. We've asked them to come along this year because they have a completely unique way of raising money. And they basically they're going to present a whistle-stop tour of the happy place where entertainment and fundraising have a ball. So this gives you a bit of useful information about how the hospitality tech sector and real world events and online happenings can create income for worthy causes. And as you can see, there are things about the quiz-a-lot thing. The word quiz is, there's usually a quiz somewhere along the line. So a team of you would pay a certain amount of money to do that quiz, and all the money would go to a charity. Allied Westminster, they're the logo in the middle. They are very, very good at helping with inquiries about village halls and community buildings and the various insurance inquiries related to them. So they're going to come along and talk about that, because it's another bit of finance that, although they're not giving finance, it is something that you need to make sure that you are following the rules from your insurance company, so that you actually save money in the long term. Ward Goodman will be talking about governance issues relating to finance. And then you can see Pudsey there down in the right-hand corner. This is to talk about Dorset-based voluntary or community groups considering submitting an application to BBC Children in Need. Come along to this particular funding workshop, because Richard King is going to present the funding programme and be on hand to answer questions. And he's also going to be doing an overview of the forthcoming funding opportunities as well, and what their current funding programmes are like. And he'll also be talking about what he feels makes a great application too. Then we've got Groundworks. Groundworks are next to Pudsey. Groundworks manage quite a lot of different funds. One of them is the ESFA Community Training Grants, and they'll be talking about that. They'll also be talking about Tesco Bags for Help, and they'll also be talking about Comic Relief, and I think that's one logo I haven't got on there. So they're going to be talking about 3 different funds that you'll be able to go for. Talbot Village Trust down the left-hand side. Many of you may have applied to them before, and many of you, if you haven't, but you've heard of them, they are an amazing local grants giving trust in Dorset. They have helped support so many different projects, and they're quite happy to support capital projects as well. So they're a family sort of trust, because they come from the Talbot sisters. That's why Talbot Woods and Talbot Village is named after them. But they really are a very engaging trust, and they do consider local ideas, and they'll come out and see you as well to have a look at what it is you want to do. And I think that's about it, apart from the fact that I should say to you that it starts at 9:45. You've got the first on the door is Talbot Village Trust, and in the next room you've got Dorset Council. Then we've got BBC Children in Need and Dorset Community Foundation. There's a time where you get the chance to actually ask the funders different questions. Then we allow you to have a short tea break, only a short one, because it's pretty crammed, this. And then we've got Ward Goodman. So Jen Richardson will be talking about governance and finance. Bozina Bien will be talking from Allied Westminster about insurance issues to do with buildings. Then we've got more workshops. We've got Quiz-a-lot, which is David Morton, and we also have a presentation from Volunteer Centing Dorset as well about how to make the most of your volunteers. Then we thought we'd give you half an hour for lunch. Now, of course, you could, sit at your dining table, bed, or wherever you happen to be, and just wolf down your sandwiches. But we thought we'd give you a half-hour break at that point. We've got John Bird after lunch from Dorset Council, along with Groundworks, which is where there'll be the things to do with actually the ESF fund I talked about earlier. Then we've got Low Carbon Dorset, and then Groundworks will be coming back again, but they'll be talking about Bags for Help from Tesco, Comic Relief. Then last but not very least, and it's probably the one that you all want to know the most about, Kirsty Main will be coming along to talk about the National Lottery. And then there's a small thing after that for half an hour about asking the funders. So that will be talking to the funders that have presented in the afternoon. And then we'll be talking a little bit about funding trends for 2021, because funding trends have changed an awful lot. If you think about, for those that went to our 2019 funding fair, COVID wasn't on the horizon. It hadn't been heard of. It just didn't exist at that time, to our knowledge. But the funding streams have changed so much over the last 12 months. So it's really, really important to find out what these funding trends are going to be, because as Paul has said earlier, we're not out of the woods yet, and funders are looking at that as well and thinking, yes, we're not out of the woods yet. So some of the funding where they would have done money for some projects, they probably won't be. They'll probably still be looking at COVID recovery. So it's an absolutely fantastic day. For those of you that have been to our funding fairs in the past in person, we know that you get an awful lot out of these events, and this is going to be our very first virtual funding fair, and we look forward to seeing as many of you as we possibly can. And it'll be an absolutely great day, and it will be you that help us make it be that success. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you. And yeah, please do check it out through either through our website or go directly to Eventbrite and look up Dorset Community Action. And of course, open up your e-news, which you'll be receiving tomorrow, which will have all the links and everything in it then. I thought it was probably just, I had a quick look through the questions that had been left. There was one around social distancing, public transport. I don't have an answer for that one. But if we do find any information available, we will make sure that we put that out through our usual news outlets. Yoga and Tai Chi were mentioned. They would come under the heading of exercise classes. So they would come under that 17th of May being the earliest that they would be able to restart, unless of course they're doing them in your hall and virtually recording it and sending it to participants, in which case that's fine. Peer support groups, they can run. They've been able to run throughout all of lockdown, and that would still be able to continue up to 15. But remember, that's around mental health issues. It's around very specific kind of peer support. It's not just a social group. It actually has to have that peer support element attached to it. Education groups, any of you that were asking questions about those, if you check out the slide which has step 1 attached to it, there will be a hyperlink on there once you're able to get them from our website. And that will have the link to the offering school activities in outdoor settings or outside settings. So do check out that link, because that will talk about all that kind of wraparound support for schools and education. And community committee meetings was mentioned as well. That would be from the 17th of May. If you invite members of the public to your meetings, so like parish councils, etc., then we would really advise waiting until the 21st of June to be really safe and to really know how many people that you can invite to those. So that was just a bit of a whistle stop. Please forgive me if I missed your question. It was just to do a quick roundup at the end. Thank you for your patience. We really do appreciate your attendance at these. It makes it so much more valuable for everybody, actually, having everybody here, because the questions are always really helpful. We look forward to seeing you next week at our funding fair, so please do check that out. It's going to be our first virtual one, and I don't know whether Joe mentioned it, but I'm terrified. It will be fine. It will be fine. But we haven't done it before, and we're hoping not to lose anybody into some ether between breakout rooms. We haven't done that yet. Sounds like a Doctor Who episode in the making, doesn't it? So, thank you for bearing with us and all of this as we all learn together. I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at the virtual funding fair. And of course, moving forward to our network events. So thank you for sticking with us, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Have a great day. Thank you.